It was right around Christmas time of 2015. I was staying in my in-laws' house. I was sleeping in my room with my very pregnant wife at the time, who was due to give birth any day. She was very uncomfortable and has been having sleep troubles. So when I left the room, she said that she was going to stay up only a little longer. The next thing I know, it sounds like something big is walking around just outside the house. Nothing, just stumbling around. I mean, it sounded like a person, but it sounded much heavier. Immediately, this struck me as odd because her parents had gone to bed and nobody would clearly be outside the house. It didn't really make much sense. I heard the noises start to go towards the back of the house, so I quickly ran to the back door. The door was made of cheap fiberglass that kind of looked like wood. I was able to see outside, but it's pretty black out there. As I'm looking out in the backyard, I can make out something huge and dark moving around right behind where her dad parks his truck in the driveway, right where the trees are. A quick frame of reference here. The driveway actually wraps around from the front, all the way to the back, where her dad parks most of his vehicles. He has a couple of cars, but mainly 2 different work trucks. Now, I see this thing moving around, and it looks much bigger than a person. My brain is trying to process what I'm seeing, but at the same time, I'm beginning to feel frightened. Surely this cannot be a person. I'm not quite sure how to make sense of what it is that I'm seeing. It's also roughly about 13 degrees Fahrenheit outside. There is no reason anybody should be out in the trees at this time of night. My in-laws did have neighbors, but they're pretty far apart, and they are also older. I just kept staring out this open door, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing, but I'm not even sure of what I'm seeing. And then, this thing, whatever it was, begins chasing after this deer full force. After a moment or so, this thing in the trees starts moving wildly, moving in the direction of the house. And my fear is quickly kicking up several notches, because if this is a person, I'm obviously too small and weak to guard my family. It's clear that whatever this is was probably going to walk right up to the door. At this point, I'm freaking out, trying to make sense of what it is I'm seeing, and I still have no idea. And then, all of a sudden, a doe runs out from behind the truck, and this thing, whatever it was, begins chasing after it in full force. Whatever I was looking at, I'm not exactly sure. It looked to me like a large hairy man, except it was completely black in color. I've seen black bears in Tennessee before, but this wasn't quite what I was looking at. Maybe a much larger version of an average bear, but looked nothing like a bear, if that makes any sense. I mean, this resembled more of a man or an ape, walking upright on 2 legs. And I think what startled me the most is that this thing was very man-like. Or I guess you might call it humanoid. It definitely was not a misidentification of a black bear. Black bears don't look like this. And it gave chase to this deer. Like it was crazy. The deer had run out into the road, across the street behind my in-laws' house. The thing just stopped, looked up at me for a moment. It was standing there, just staring at me. It was probably no more than around 80 yards away from me. I could see these small little glimmers of light that were its eyes. This terrified me. Then it turned its head back in the direction of the deer and kept on pressing forward after it. As soon as it cleared view, this massive black shape flees from the side of my in-laws' house, not even 20 feet away from me, and I nearly fall back on my butt. This other one goes charging after the other 2, the large shape and the deer, and I realize now that the heavy sounds of somebody walking around near the house I was hearing was actually one of these things, a second one, meaning there was one outside the house all along, and another in the trees beyond my father-in-law's truck. I wonder if they were chasing after this deer. I don't know. Did I just witness a hunt by these large hairy creatures? Do I even bother to tell my wife what had happened? How do I process this? Why was this even happening? Thank you for anybody who comments in this thread. I was spending the night with some good friends of mine from high school when I was about 20, 21. We'd all been drinking, playing Cards Against Humanity, having a really good time. At some point, I passed out from all the pizza, liquor, and laughs. I remember waking up and I had to go use the bathroom. Something that happens when you drink with friends a lot. And just so you know, by this point, I was pretty much sober. But something made me stop and look up at the window. And I see this large shape go by. And immediately, I'm panicking, convinced somebody was trying to break in. So I'm looking around the room, but nobody else was awake. This was easily probably 2 or 3 in the morning. Everybody's passed out. I got out of bed, put on my pants with the intention of emptying my bladder, when something made me turn to look at the window one last time before heading downstairs. I have no idea what compelled me to, it's just this feeling in me. When I turned that corner, I saw the shape again moving across the yard. There were several trees between us, so it's hard for me to say exactly how big or how far away this thing was from me. But I'm positive it wasn't more than 20 yards away. What I'm almost certain about this, whatever thing was, it looked like a large dog, or something that was very tall. I don't know. The whole thing gave me really bad vibes. It still spooks me out to talk about it. So I run down the stairs, empty my bladder in the bathroom, and throw some water on my face to try and come to it. At this point, everybody's still crashed out, so I don't really bother trying to wake anybody up, telling them what I saw. I simply assume I just drank too much and make it a point to go back to bed. Now, the very next morning, I'm talking to those same friends and we're talking about last night, and I tell them, yeah, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw this large dog walking up to the house. They certainly got a kick out of that and thought I was just joking. I wasn't. Every single person there agreed with me that it was odd that I would just make something up like that. I wasn't. Up here in Canada, we certainly have a lot of wild animals, but we don't really get too much into the way of werewolves or other cryptids. Now, I've heard some rumors about Canada's west coast, specifically British Columbia, and I guess these kinds of creatures are pretty active up there. Far more than a few people insist on seeing them regularly. But that's our thing here. We have some great cryptids lurking about. I was going to dub this dogman sightings, but the thing is that there are some dogman sightings not just in Canada, but in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, all over North America, even down south, towards Texas, Louisiana, Arizona. If you've not heard of dogmen before, these are werewolf-like creatures said to inhabit Michigan and the surrounding areas. I assume it's called the dogman because it looks like a dog, as far as the build goes, but it has characteristics of a man, such as walking upright on 2 legs. They're bigger than most dogs, about the size of a wolf, if not larger. They also have long hair, and sometimes fur as well. Sometimes, it's said to be completely covered in hair, and not unlike that of an ape, while other times there seems to be patches of flesh showing through the thick covering of hair. I guess that would make sense if it's something that changes between human-like form and wolf-like form. They're usually said to have glowing yellow eyes, but sometimes red or even blue eyes are reported. They can supposedly be up to 6 feet tall. It's supposed to kill in its own kind as well as humans, leaving the bodies far from water and not eating any of them. What's strange about this is that while I don't necessarily believe in the shape-shifting from man to wolf, I believe this is a type of creature instead. It's been spotted in so many regions and remains an imminent threat to our society if ultimately left unchecked. These are what I believe to be alpha predators that we're talking about here. It's not just something that can be shrugged off. The thing is, though, these sightings are becoming more and more common, and there have been some videos, I guess, taken of this creature. I'm hoping this means that people will start to protect themselves and take this whole thing more seriously, assuming that they are proven to exist beyond the realm of just imagination. There are a lot of theories about why these dogmen are appearing, and why it's been active for so long. Is it truly a shapeshifter? Are they people who were attacked by one of these things and having their DNA rewritten? Are the stories about them true? Or are they just stories about fabricated tales told around the campfires to keep us wary of the darkness? One of the scariest dogman encounters I was told about personally was from back in 2014, when a man who I'll name as Jim was camping out with his girlfriend. They were in Michigan, and they spotted one of these so-called creatures walking upright. I guess he was able to get some pictures and even got a quick video before this thing snarled at him and scurried off. He might have been a great distance away, but this thing gave him the goosebumps. Jim's girlfriend also freaked out once she saw the image on his camera, which didn't surprise me. Jim was later on arrested and all of his equipment confiscated, which I find very strange. In 2017, a woman named Denise was taking her dogs to a park when she saw one of these creatures on a dirt road ahead of them. She stopped and tried to take a picture when her phone suddenly malfunctioned. It appeared like this creature was going to charge at them, so she didn't want to stay and watch. Her boyfriend also said that the creature looked like it was trying to mimic a human. He was with Denise. She said she did not see anything in its eyes but bloodlust, and it noted that she saw an intelligence in this creature, more so than any other wild animal she had ever seen. It's unknown if there are really more dogmen than there were before, or if the number of sightings are simply increasing since more people are out and about in the wilderness. Either way, you can look at it as though this is a cryptid that has been feared by indigenous peoples for generations. I'd like to find out if these things really do exist, so we could figure out just how to fight back against them. I was 7 when this happened, and the year was 1992. I remember walking home from my grandparents' house at like 11 p.m. on a late summer night. It was very hot that night. I remember. Really sticky. As I was walking home, it's pretty humid, about 1.5 miles long. But my parents trusted me. We were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so didn't really have to worry about predators. I decided to take a shortcut through the woods next to my house, or I should say that would lead to my house. Little did I know, this night would be one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life. My family and I used to live in this 2-story house with 3 other families. We all shared a backyard, a laundry room, kitchen, bedrooms, etc. So you would often see everybody and everything happening all around your home. Even when we moved out years later, our neighbors still talked about how the dogman likes to come into their backyard sometimes during the night. At the time, my parents never told me about this. Rightfully so. I would have been terrified. Now, I'm walking back, and I see this large dog in the back portion of our yard. I stop and think for a minute. The whole thing just didn't seem right. I mean, I know all animals that shared our yard with us, and no way this dog was it. It looked very out of place, and this shape was standing very still next to the fence, like it had been caught and was just wanting me to go away. My instinct told me, no, screamed at me to run into the house. But I didn't listen. I kept walking towards it. As I got closer, There was something about this figure that just made me want to get as far away as possible. And as soon as my front feet hit that front portion of the yard that night, I decided to run. Run for help. When I got into the house and upstairs, my parents, when everybody else was awake, they asked what had happened. Of course, I told them I saw the creature in the yard. This is when things got weirder. It was in this moment I realized that the thing stood next to the fence was not a dog. It was covered in hair. Its face looked like an actual wolf's or a coyote's. It had yellow eyes that you could see from the streetlight outside too, because this was not the first time I saw it. My dad really wanted me to show him where it was, and I refused, telling him I didn't want to see it anymore. This night alone left me with nightmares of what I saw, and all the weird feelings about being home alone after dark for years after this had happened. A few months ago, I got a call from my girlfriend in the middle of the night, asking me to come over and check on the noises that were coming from on her roof in the backyard. We'd been dating for a while, but weren't quite at the very spend every night together stage yet. I was kind of pissed to start with, as I'd had an early shift at work. It was unlikely that I'd be able to get even shut-eye after all. I mean, with whatever she needed me to deal with, I was there. I was hoping it would earn me some brownie points. Plus, she sounded pretty freaked out. So, this was my big chance to put the big white knight armor on and come to her saving. When I pulled up into her driveway, she was peering out nervously from behind the door, waiting for me. I jogged up to the house. She pulls me inside, slamming the door behind me. I wondered for a second if this was all just a ploy of hers, and she had really just asked me to come over for some surprise booty call. But something was off. The look of sheer terror in her eyes soon put pay to that idea, and her next words chilled me. "He's come down off the roof. He's in the backyard." Whoa. He? When she called me, she'd said there were noises, like skittering and banging, as if there was some animal up there or even a really large big bird. Now, all of a sudden, it was a he. I felt a whole lot less brave all of a sudden. I might have been okay with scaring away a raccoon, but a person could easily have a gun. "Did you call the cops?" I'd asked her, wondering why 911 wasn't the first port of call, and me second. Again, those terrified eyes looked at me, and she shook her head no. "No cops. Not for this." I was about to ask why not, and just what on earth did she expect little old unarmed me to do against some potentially violent and crazed offender. She added this: "It's best I just show you." Now, I've heard some crazy stories in my time. Growing up, my mom loved those magazines that cover things like, three-headed cows and I married my freezer, that kind of stuff. She also loved watching any kind of TV show that involved people hunting ghosts or talking about when they met an alien. I have always 100% thought it was complete and utter BS. Maybe those people were crazy, and they believed their own stories, but not me. There was no way anything like that could ever be possible. Which was why, as I stared into my girlfriend's backyard, which was semi-illuminated by a security light on the porch, at first, I just could not believe my eyes. Standing close to the fence, as if I'm trying to make up its mind or whether to jump over or not, was what I can only describe as a lizard man. A reptilian humanoid, if you want to get all conspiracy theory and technical, I guess. He was tall, over 6 feet and slender. He appeared naked. Not that lizards are famous for wearing clothes, but, His entire body was a kind of gray and scaly. His limbs long and lean. He also appeared to have webbed feet and hands. But the freakiest part of all was his head. Oval-shaped with 2 huge eyes that had very distinctive lizard-like appearance. You know, the pupil is long, rather than a small circle. 2 small nostril holes, and then a thin, wide mouth, which every so often darted this tongue and sharp teeth. My mind was whirling, and I asked how long he'd been there. She replied that the noises on the roof had started about a half hour ago. She called me, and she heard this sort of slithering or wet noise coming from the backyard. She'd snuck down, having no clue what to expect, and had one heck of a shock. He'd been stood there ever since, not making any contact or trying to come inside. But, nevertheless, his mere presence being utterly terrifying. I still wondered what exactly she wanted me to do, since I don't talk to lizards, and was on the verge of a meltdown myself just from seeing this dude, when all of a sudden he spun around, scaled the fence inhumanly, and vanished. I grabbed a flashlight, which she had stood on the counter, and ran into the yard, opening the gate and looking into the woods that stretches for miles behind her house. No sign. She came back to my place and hasn't been able to sleep on her own since. Sometimes, we do stay at her place, and thankfully, there have been no more noises or sightings. Where did he come from? What did he want? How many more of him are out there, or did he just take on human form again? If you believe some of the crazies. I guess we'll probably never know. I work for a sewage plant. It's one of those jobs, much like people that collect trash or clean public restrooms. Nobody really wants and everybody thinks is a dirty job. But without us, the cities would be crawling with filth. Literally. I have a series of pretty mundane jobs at the actual plant. But once in a while, a call comes in about something, which means, yes, we have to go down into the sewers, into the underbelly of the cities, and work on whatever the problem is down there. And yes, fatbergs are just as horrific as they look on TV. There is nothing remotely pleasant about those tunnels, but I just get on. No point complaining or making a meal of it. However, I also never lose focus. You have to keep your wits about you, and your eye on the job at hand. I've seen rats the size of cats, or even small dogs down there. After all, it is their territory. They are not in the least bit scared of me, and have even attacked before in the past. We've also found stuff that makes absolutely no sense. Things that couldn't have gone down any toilet or plug hole. You can't even begin to imagine their journey. A buddy once made the most gruesome discovery that any of us have come across so far. A hobo had come down somehow and froze to death. No one reported him missing, and it was weeks before we had a call to go down there for something unrelated. That was a hell of a mess, and my colleague still gets nightmares. Although I'm eternally grateful that it wasn't me that stumbled across that corpse. At least there was a solid explanation behind it. At least we had closure on how and why it happened. Now, my story has no such plausible reasoning. Let me tell you why. Oftentimes, we work in pairs or even teams for safety reasons. But, as with everything, times were hard, and there had been redundancies. If you could do a job alone, then you would. No extra bodies available for backup, which was why I found myself down in the sewers on a routine check after a call about a simple blockage. I'd been down there now for about an hour when I heard a noise. Now, clearly, that is not unusual in and of itself. There are all sorts of things constantly moving around down there, but this noise was quite strange, almost like a clicking, and then an occasional tapping. I had never heard anything quite like it. I mean, either down there or on the surface. I just could not place what it could be. There are quite a few crossroads and T-junctions in the tunnels, It would be easy to get lost if you didn't know your way about. And as I was approaching one now, something large darted in front of me. Now, when I say large, I don't mean the size of a dog rat. I mean something getting on towards my own height. It moved super fast, and I just got a flash of blurry green as it flew past me. But I assumed, as why on earth would I think otherwise, that it was a person. An unauthorized person, as I was the only worker on call there. And that meant they were either up to no good, a danger to themselves, or both. I quickly followed suit, calling out that I was an official worker, and he should stop so I could escort him out safely. I must have chased him out of the tunnels for a good 5 minutes before it halted in front of me. Although visibility was poor, I did have a headlamp on, and the helmet was a little big, so the light kept bouncing around. But I was being vigilant, making sure my footing was on point and I didn't fall, while keeping an eye to make sure the figure was still moving in front of me. But other than a shadowy blur, I still hadn't gotten anywhere near a decent look at him yet. However, as often happens to newer colleagues, or indeed people who should not be down there, he'd taken a wrong turn, and we were at a dead end, which now meant I could face him, and the only way out would be to come back and pass right by me. Now, I was stationary and a lot closer. My headlamp cast a good light upon him, but what I saw from the back didn't make a lickety-split of sense. The only thing I could think of in that moment was that I had stumbled upon a very dedicated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cosplayer, and literally nothing else would have added up. He was facing the wall, but very clear view of his back. It showed me an intricate and no doubt very expensive looking lizard-like skin. His legs were very thick and muscular, lots of rippling muscles, and his head was kind of bent forward. Then he, which I still assume is he, slowly turned around to face me. Now, I wasn't sure which of the Ninja Turtles I was expecting, but this guy looked nothing like a turtle, like I originally thought. It looked like a man-sized iguana or something, and just this frightening look on its face, like how dare I corner it. And right at that moment, I don't know who was more surprised or terrified. I was face to face with something that shouldn't possibly exist. A man-sized iguana lizard thing, standing there on 2 legs. Half man, half lizard, I thought. Man, maybe the sewage mutated this person or something. I don't know. I was incredibly frightened. And something that I hadn't mentioned before is that I love animals. I have 3 rescue cats and 2 dogs that I've saved. I had no plan on hurting this being, no matter how disturbing it was. So I slowly backed away. I kept my eyes on it, and it kept its gaze locked on me, staring intently, making this very agitated clicking noise, like it was going to strike at any moment, like a snake. Eventually, I waited for a few moments and then turned around and ran, returning back to my original location and task at hand. Although I often think about this experience, you're the first person I've told. Don't get me wrong, if anybody ever reported an attack, I would tell. But until then, I'm not sure why that I feel I want to keep it a secret. Maybe for the fact that if I said anything, my career could be jeopardized, or be... I live on a very busy working ranch, with a team of people constantly helping to keep the place going. The animals need a lot of care, and we get a ton of visitors, all whilst we treat the animals with the most respect. They are part of the ranch after all, and not just pets, each having a vital role to play. That said, it is impossible to not get attached. Rusty is an older mare, and a firm favorite of mine. She's a good girl, allowing all the little uns to pet and ride her. Never had a problem. So, when one of the ranch hands had reported that he'd been in to feed her and she'd kicked him, I knew something was up. Turned out she had some pretty nasty cuts to her belly and was in a considerable amount of pain. I was livid. We locked all of the animals up safely each and every night. How could this have happened? But we treated it as a terrible yet unfortunate accident. We made sure to take extra care of her to ensure everything was secure the next night. The next morning, I awoke to yet another mysterious and horrific incident. All of the chickens having been killed. Some of them literally ripped to pieces, yet they didn't seem to have been dragged away or eaten. I was still wondering what the hell could have caused the injuries to the horse, and now something had created utter carnage and devastation, but yet had not eaten them. After finding out about the latest devastation, a couple of the workers refused to come in. They'd been on the ranch for years, never so much as a sick day, and yet were so spooked by the events, they were abandoning me. I was angry to start, but realized they were scared, although they refused to tell me why exactly. There were, of course, various predators that lived in the wilds surrounding the ranch. We weren't the only living things in the area, but I was still baffled as to what could have possibly seemingly climbed over the stable door without any trace to hurt just Rusty. And also, what would kill the chickens but not eat them? It was like something clever was targeting them. But what? That night, I stayed up and kept watch through the kitchen door, where I had sight of the stables. The ranch was silent. I'd sent my wife and kids off to her mother's, just in case we were dealing with some unknown predator. I kept the lights off, just the dull glow of my phone keeping me company, and my shotgun in hand. Somewhere around 2 a.m, I heard a very distinct noise. I sat up, shutting off my cell so it was now pitch black, and opening the door just enough to poke the gun through, my finger tightly on the trigger. The sound again came and I froze. What was it? It was laughter, which was terrifying in and of itself, since I had very much been expecting an animal intruder, not a human. But even worse was that I recognized that very distinctive laugh. It was my mother's, only she had been dead these last 5 years. And then I saw something that made absolutely no sense, even less than hearing a voice from the grave. The intruder stepped out of the shadows in the security light over by the stables, and the light tripped on, revealing just what was the cause of all the attacks. Standing in the light was some sort of weird coyote, not what you'd expect as an alpha predator. Only this was no ordinary animal. It was standing on its hind legs, giving the appearance it was human-like. It started to make its way on those 2 legs over to the stable door when I heard it laugh again. Not even remotely the sound which any kind of creature emits. That was enough. I aimed, took a shot. Bang! It gave a very human-sounding scream and ran off with impossible speed. I flung open the door, gave chase, but I had very little light. I could not see where it had gone. I shot off another couple of warnings, and then went back to calm the horses, who were very worked up and jittery due to the noise and the situation. The next morning, one of the workers who had the day before refused to come in asked to speak to me. I was throwing down some strong cowboy coffee, having been unable to sleep a wink after the incident. This particular employee was more like a friend of the family. He'd been with us for years, and I was glad of his working knowledge of the ranch and the incredible stories he loved to tell. You see, he was of Navajo descent, actually, and his parents had grown up on a local res. He was always very friendly, helpful, and had a smile for my kids. Right then, however, He looked years older and scared. That only increased when I told him about my latest encounter. In the end, he took me to see a very old medicine man, who was literally the only person who could help. He told me that I had encountered a skinwalker, somebody who had succumbed to bad magic and was able to actually mimic the animal of which they wore the skin of for a short time. Several things would give them away. Even though they wore an animal form, they would still often move like a human, behave like one. Their eyes would still be human-esque, and thankfully, I hadn't gotten that close. They were also apparently able to mimic voices, including those of people who had passed, either to lure victims or just mess with them and cause mischief. Their attacks were often very personal. The medicine man asked if I had done something against a native person, whether on purpose or unwittingly. I couldn't think of anything, and neither could my employee. In the end, the elder blessed my land and did a few things I wasn't allowed to ask about or know of, but I can happily say that there's been no trace of this creature or skinwalker ever since. A few years ago, I was having a hard time at school, at home, and even with my girlfriend. Things were really getting to me, and I was having trouble sleeping. Because of this, I often took real late walks in the woods behind the suburb where I lived, which backed onto a real fancy golf course. The grounds were beautiful. It was one of the only country club places that cost a fortune. But the woods surrounding it were public, and there were no issues with me being there at night. I never saw anybody else. No late joggers or dog owners. I mean, who would you expect to be out walking at 2 a.m.? It wasn't exactly like a zoo in there, but at the same time, there were plenty of regular woodland animals, and oftentimes, I would scare one by accident, since, nighttime is their time. But they never tried to attack or anything. Some annoyed chittering was about as much of a telling off as I would get. Although I was pretty sure that I was the only other person I would ever meet out there. It would either be a sleepwalker who traveled really far or somebody else like myself suffering from insomnia. I was always nevertheless careful as I walked around, just to be on the safe side. I didn't think any escaped convicts would bother coming here, or potential serial killers, but you still gotta keep your eyes open. So, when I heard a very distinct sound, that of another person talking, or maybe better to describe it as mumbling, I wasn't afraid, but I was also on very high alert. The closer I got to the sound, the more concerned I grew. Not because I thought it was anything weird or unexplainable, but because the incoherent mumbling sounded like somebody who was drunk or high. I didn't want to scare them and have them attack me, but equally, I felt some kind of civic duty to make sure they were okay and not hurt. The woods can be an amazingly relaxing and safe place if you know the trails. It can be scary and dangerous as hell if you can't see where you're going, because you've got sunk too many times or smoked too much weed. I had a flash on my cell, pretty useless, just emitting a pathetic beam, but it was better than nothing. Now, the closer I got to the strange noise, I noticed a really bad smell. Definitely the kind of stink that I would usually associate with maybe a dead animal. I was again beginning to worry about what this person had done. Although we don't exactly have a lot of tweakers, I know what meth and PCP can do to people. I didn't really want to come face to face with some dude eating a dead deer raw or something gross like that. Looking back at it now, I almost kind of wish it was that. At least that would have been a plausible explanation. As I turned the corner and approached the small clearing where I believed the person to be, I shone the flash on my cell, trying my best to see what I was up against. What I saw made no sense at all. It definitely was not a person, although it was as tall as me, maybe even bigger. That was only because it had brought itself up on 2 legs, rather than the 4 it should have been standing up on. You see, standing by one of the trees, quite steadily on 2 hind legs and muttering, intelligible but still very much human words, was some sort of deer. A stag to be precise. It had huge antlers, and looked like they could do some real damage. To say I was stunned would be a huge understatement. I stood there just staring at it, and the fear didn't set in for a moment or two. I was in such shock. I mean, who wouldn't be? Here, I was expecting some drunk guy who'd wandered from the bar and gotten lost, or some junkie who'd rolled into town and taken too much meth before chowing down on Bambi. Instead, I got a human-sized, 2-legged talking giant stag. The fear was about as real as it seemed to notice me, and the muttering stopped immediately. It gave this strange noise, which I've heard actual deer make before. That was it. I'm not afraid to tell you that I almost needed new pants. I ran, and ran, all the way back to my house. I tripped so many times and I was panicking. Not much better than what it was. Although I was covered in scratches and bruises, but that was better than what could have happened to me back there. You see, it suddenly dawned on me exactly what this thing was. How was it possible for me to be seeing something that shouldn't exist? It wasn't some weird form of a man or beast hybrid. The only possible explanation that this was a skinwalker. The only thing was I literally have no idea what it was doing here or who it was after. Was it possibly expecting somebody in those woods? Or was it expecting me?